Okay, so for all good, I'm going to go ahead and get started, just out of respect for your time and the time of our students. All right, so let me just pull this up here really quick. So thank you everyone for joining us today. So today we are hosting our Education in Practice panel. And for those who aren't aware, the idea behind the panel is really to give students and some insight into what it's like as a practitioner. So not just about curriculum and concepts and theory or techniques, but more so what is it like being an instructor or a practitioner within education or a teacher, right? And just getting a feel for what are some of the things that we don't always learn through our degrees, right? Because it doesn't necessarily prepare us for everything in the classroom, and there's a lot it does not cover as a practitioner that we learn on the fly. Just overall, in terms of our agenda for today and the way it's going to be set up, is we're going to do introductions, we're going to go run through Q&A. There is going to be time at the end for audience questions. And so if you are a student and you have questions during any of this, please put them as a chat as we go. We won't necessarily answer them as we're going, but I will refer back to them when we get to the Q&A part. I really recommend that you ask them as we go, because oftentimes people forget by the time you get to the end there. So I really encourage you to ask them, because that's really what we're going to dedicate some time towards. So if there are a surplus of questions, we will actually cut down our regular questions a little bit so we can get to your questions. That's something that we've kind of designed for as well. And then there'll also be a very quick moment at the end for just final thoughts and any final advice there might be. So that's just a quick rundown of what today's going to be about. Let me also discuss some logistical things. So this is a session that's going to be recorded, and the reason we do that is so that students who can't attend because of work or other responsibilities, that they can also view this session and learn from that as well. And so I haven't yet clicked the recording button. I'll let you know right before that happens. And usually what I do is right before we hit audience questions, I usually turn it off just so you're welcome to ask what questions you wish to ask, and it's more authentic that way. But for the main core part of the webinar, that will be recorded for students to view. So that's just a heads up. All right, so if there aren't any questions in terms of logistics and things like that, that is a rundown of what we're going to do. So today I am joined by multiple people who I'm very happy could join us. So very quickly, I'm going to just do a very brief introduction, because we will have a more formal introduction as part of the questions themselves. So I'm joined today by multiple panelists, one of whom is Brandy Carnline. And so she works in Frisco ISD in Miller Elementary School as a librarian currently, but also has past experience working within special education as an instructor for multiple years. I'm also joined by Angelica Lenderos Henderson, who has both of her degrees from TWU, so she's a double alumni, as I like to say, from our institution. And so she works as an instructor or a teacher in Golden Rule School, I believe, in Pleasant Grove campus. And so she also worked here and was a colleague of mine. She worked in the Go Center here, so some of y'all may even recognize her from her work with us. And I'm also joined by another facilitator, Chrissy Meeks, who serves as the career consultant for both our College of Nursing and the College of Education here in Denton, Texas. All right, so our very first question, and I'll leave that to Chrissy to get us started.
Hey everyone. I wanted to clarify one quick thing before I go on to our first question. Our meeting, I believe, was set to auto record. So Rahid had mentioned that he was going to press record, but it has actually been recording since everyone was added. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone is fully aware that you've been being recorded since then. And if you are uncomfortable with that, please just go ahead and turn your cameras off. And but that's it. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew and that I clarified that. But let's go ahead and jump into our first question for our panelists. And that is, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background? And I'll just allow our panelists to popcorn or speak up, whoever wants to go first, no particular order.
Do you want to go, Brandy, or?
Sure, I'll go.
Hi, my name is Brandy Carnline, and my education background kind of started a different way. My first degree is in business. So I have a Bachelor of Business Administration from Stephen F. Austin. I was in the business world for a while and realized that's probably not what I wanted to do. I wanted to get into education. So I got a master's degree in elementary education from Texas A&M Commerce. I taught third grade in Princeton ISD, and then I went to Frisco ISD teaching special education for 5 years, and I started going to school at TWU, and I got my Graduate of Library certification from the School of Library and Information Services at TWU, and now I'm a librarian for the past 4 years at Miller Elementary in Frisco ISD.
So my name's Angelica, and I currently teach ELAR and social studies at Golden Rule, which is located in Pleasant Grove. My background, I have a bachelor's of science in bilingual education, EC through 6. And so my career path, I did not know yet really what I wanted to do. And so my path went the other route, but I knew I wanted to help students. And so I went into higher ed, which is working at a university and colleges. And so I worked strictly morally for first generation students and college students. So I knew that aspect. And so then as I was working, I also took courses at TWU and was certified with master's in education. And so then I decided, I think I worked at TWU for 10 years. And then I decided, you know what, I want to go back and teach elementary. And so I did. I came back to Golden Rule Elementary School, and I love it. I love it.
And then I'll be serving today as like a panelist and facilitator in both roles today. But my name is Rohit Prasad. It is pronounced like you're rowing a boat, and it's hot outside. Rohit, that is like my go-to intro. But I currently serve as the career consultant for the College of Business. But prior to this, I worked in a lot of nonprofit education-based roles. So I did a number of years with AmeriCorps. For those who aren't familiar, it's like the Peace Corps, but you work over here. So I did a number of years with the AmeriCorps, and I've also taught seminar in a number of places, or a version of seminar. Whether it was at UNT, UTD, and at TWU last year. So I've done instruction work for freshmen primarily. And then when I taught in the nonprofit realm, it was mainly with middle school and high school students in college readiness programs. And so that's a little bit about my experience in education. I really got started mainly with tutoring, and eventually that led into just wanting to become an educator in some form or another. And that's where I eventually landed to what I do today. My degrees themselves are, so my bachelor's is not in education, it's in public administration. At the time, I was more focused on nonprofit work. But then by the time I finished that, I realized I wanted to go into education. So I got my master's of education afterwards from UNT. So I think we all find a way to end up in education in some way or another. I just realized I'm also doing the even questions. So
I can take over all the questions.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, you guys, we had planned to switch off on our questions and ask one or like even and odd questions, but since Rohit's going to be serving as our panelist today, I'll just go ahead and ask all the questions. That way he can just kind of hang out and answer.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move on to our second question. By the way, thank you everyone for just sharing a little bit about who you are and kind of what you're doing and how you got there. But our next question is, what initially sparked your interest in teaching?
I'll go ahead and start if we're going to stay in order of how we answer the last question. So I honestly didn't know when I went to college that I wanted to be an educator. My degree is in business, and it took me a long time to figure out that's what I wanted to do. So I went into the business world probably about 2 or 3 years. And I was happy, but I just felt like it wasn't the right place for me. I even tried 2 or 3 different jobs and it still wasn't a fit. And so I decided to become a paraprofessional in Richardson ISD. I quit my business job and became a paraprofessional. And so I went into the schools. And I did that before actually getting my master's degree or going back for certification. I did that just to see, is this a fit? And it was, and I loved it. And so from there, I realized that is where I need to be. And I started getting my certification that way. It took me a while to figure out that's what I wanted to do. But once I got in that setting, I knew that that was the right place for me.
Well, for me, in my piece, from high school, I went straight to the BU, and I knew that I wanted to be in education overall. At a young age, I would teach my cousins who lived in Mexico English, and so I knew that that's from the start that I wanted to work in education and to teach some kids. So so that's where I knew, and I knew that, but I did not know that like when it was gonna happen, right? And so I did that, and then again, like I mentioned earlier, like I decided, I like to help kids. Maybe this is the career path where I want to be at. So then I went to higher ed, which is working with high school kids and adults. And so, but then it took me 10 years to realize that, sometimes you need to take take a deep breath and reevaluate and refocus in seeing what was the main thing that inspired you and to be a teacher. And so that kind of made me want to go back into education in elementary. And so that's kind of the path where I'm at. I'm not too sure. Thinking now, you know what, I can do both. I can probably go ahead and go back to TWU and be a professor, an assistant, an adjunct professor, and also teach the elementary kids. So maybe I'll do both. And my husband thinks that's too much for me, especially when I have a 4-year-old. And so, he's like, but I will do what, you can do whatever you wish. And I think that's very valuable and supportive that you need to have as well when you're either right now currently going through the program. Take a step back and seeing like, is this really what I want to do? But leave your options open. Just leave them open, because you never know where you're going to be.
So I would say, I'm trying to think back because it's been a while. So I'm trying to think. I think it probably started when I first signed up to become a tutor, which I was not technically a tutor in the beginning. So I was essentially just volunteering at the school because I was having trouble finding a part-time job during summer. And so an opportunity came up to just volunteer at the local high school that I went to. And then one of the days while I was volunteering, I was volunteering with a teacher that helped me get into college to begin with. And so I offered to just help her class out, which is, just what it's like being in college and helping them with their applications and things like that. And so one day when I was in the library, one of my old teachers was there as well, and she taught a course called AVID. I had never been in AVID. For those who are not familiar with AVID, it's a college readiness program usually designed into high schools as part of a curriculum that they buy into. But she was the AVID teacher at the time and even back then. But she kind of called me over and waved me over, and I was like, you seem really familiar, but I can't quite place what it was. She's like, oh, I taught psychology. And I'm like, okay, I know exactly what we're talking about now. So, and she's like, we had a small conversation, but at the end of it, she was like, are you looking for a job? Because we're hiring tutors right now. And I was like, I'm not really tutoring like in algebra or anything like that. She's like, well, it's not that kind of tutoring. We tutor in college readiness type stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds really cool. She's like, why don't you go ahead and apply? Because I was one of those people that didn't like putting an effort on things or initiative on a lot of things. And so I usually had to be pushed by people to do something. And so when I finally applied the following week, they gave me a call back pretty quickly and hired me on. But that, I would say, initially got me started in teaching. And once I actually started working with students, I realized, oh, this is actually pretty fun. Because I honestly did not think I'd like it, because I don't like working with people that much. At least back then, I did not enjoy it that much. So I did not think of myself as someone who would be good at teaching or something like that. I also really sucked at communication, right? Like my hands would shake, my voice would stutter. It was not who I was. And for anyone who knows teaching, it's hard to go into teaching if you don't have good communication skills. And so I had ruled it out from the very get-go. But after building up some skill set in tutoring and during my 4 years in college, where I really had an opportunity to build upon communication skills, I realized it was very much doable. So I think just because you don't possess the skills necessarily to be a teacher, or you don't think that you do, just know that you have time to build upon those skills. No one, pops out and is like, you know what, I'm going to be a teacher from day one. Some people are like that, but I doubt it. But you can always build upon your skill sets, even if that's not something you feel like you're a natural at. In my case, it was very much not something I ever thought about in the beginning, or something I thought about even in high school. It's something I kind of fell into after I realized, oh, this is actually pretty fun. I kind of like doing this. I like working with students and kids and helping them reach that next step. So that's, I guess, where my initial interest really sparked, was a little bit of happenstance and kind of the realization that you can build upon a certain kind of skill set.
Thank you all for your answers. One thing I wanted to just highlight about something that you all kind of made the point of while you answered the questions were that one of the things that we teach at the Career Center is that career paths are nonlinear. And so each and every one of you kind of told your story and started from one area and ended up in a totally different area. And I just thought that that was really interesting that you were all able to highlight kind of that, or at least validate that message that we share with our students a lot, that you can start from anywhere and end up anywhere as well. So I just thought it was really interesting how you all had a different way to highlight that. Our next question is, are there specific topics that you add to your class's curriculum beyond the state requirements that you find are important? And if so, why?
Okay, I'll start. Being in the library and being a librarian to me is so fun. It's probably the best job in the whole school. I love being a librarian. I technically don't have curriculum. I don't stick to TEKS necessarily, but I can. And so I usually do, but I get to teach whatever I want to teach, whatever I think the kids need. They might need social skills, they might need some math, in there, and I can put I could get literature and I can integrate that with math, and we just have so much fun. So the library one day could be a science room, the next day I'm teaching ELAR, I'm teaching social skills, I'm teaching whatever they need. And so that is probably my favorite part of the library, how I get to extend the curriculum. But I also love to teach. Actually, it's not teaching, it's just kind of showing them that reading can be fun. And so my main job, and the job that I like the most, is to match kids up with books that they like to read. And so sometimes they're being told what they need to read, but that's not necessarily what we do as adults. When we go into the library, we get to read whatever we want to. And so that's probably my favorite thing to do with kids, is to match them with books.
So I would say right now there's a need in ESL. And so if you are intending to seek another certification, I would say ESL. Like I know my school district right now, like my kids, all of the majority of our students are bilingual and ESL students. And so they need, we need support for ESL. So if you're thinking of seeking a certification, that would pretty much do it. And I think some of the school districts are now requiring some, I'm not going to say like all of them, but some are requiring that you also have an ESL certification. I know there's a need also in special education. That's another need area. So if you're trying to seek, you can do a minor in maybe in one of those fields. So maybe Spanish or another language. That's another way to consider also. You can do a bachelor's of science in ESL through 6, but then also get a minor in Spanish. Um, Another one I would say is technology. Maybe going to, you can also think about community college. Sorry, guys. But maybe you can think about community college. Sometimes they have those short certification time periods where you can go. Maybe thinking like some sort of technology, because as you know, right now with COVID, a lot of the students are more getting more familiar with technology. And if you are able to provide them with those resources in advance, I think that that's a pro. And, principals will also like that. So those are one things that maybe you can seek into.
So I know for myself, I wasn't as bound by state requirements working as an adjunct teaching seminar. We did have many requirements in terms of, I guess, learning objectives to make sure that they're kind of learning how to learn. So how to write an essay, research, things like that. So those are our baseline requirements that we kind of met when it came to curriculum. But in terms of topics we typically would add on, or I would add on to the syllabus, would be usually centered around some kind of wellness. That's something that you're going to see more. It's just becoming more prevalent within education as we talk about self-care, not only for educators, but for our students. You'll see that become, I think, just more important. There are some initiatives out there, I'm not going to say every school district's necessarily leading the front on these efforts, but you are going to see that there is more attention brought to that. So I think, at least within my syllabuses and my classes, financial literacy was huge. Financial wellness. I mean, for myself, the way I reason it is, if financial reasons are the number one reason a student's going to leave or drop out, then if we can help address that, that can certainly be one of the reasons they stay. So that's one of the larger topics that I try to integrate into my curriculum, is financial literacy. But I think anytime you add curriculum, of course you can always bring in speakers and things like that, but I think it also helps for yourself to be well versed in it. So that once the speaker leaves, or if let's say you can't find a speaker, are you familiar enough with that content to teach that content? I think is just as important. And then I guess another major thing that you're going to see is, in terms of adding in topics, is kind of mental wellness that you're going to see. So more I guess not necessarily curriculum, but content about self-care, counseling, the services within community and resources depending on the district, because it does vary quite drastically district by district what kind of resources they have for students. It is not the same all across the board. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. So how you teach and what resources you have to offer are often dependent on that district or that school. It also, I think, just as an educator in general, I think it's helpful to know the resources in your community in case they aren't available through your district, because they can still have access to that. So I think it's just helpful to familiarize yourself with just some basic wellness topics you want to integrate if you do want to do that. But I think more so than that, be familiar with resources outside of your school, because that's something students can often use as well and can come in handy related to wellness and other topics. But yeah, I would say aspects of wellness, particularly financial and mental wellness, are things I've tried to integrate into my content curriculum.
Thank you all for such great answers. I try to take notes and kind of highlight sort of a general theme if I can when everyone answers these questions. And I really thought you all did a great job highlighting the flexibility that you have in your work, and also the variety of ways that you can kind of insert your own passions into, the different ways that you connect with your students. And I just think that question is a really great way of highlighting, how you can make the job more than a job and be able to connect to it personally. So with that, let's move on to the next question. Question number 4 is, what do you wish that you would have learned about teaching while you were still in school?
Well, when I first went into school, probably my first year or two of teaching third grade, it didn't occur to me until I got several years into education, but every year is different. And so when I was a first year teacher, I thought this was going to be such a tough year. I was learning, everything was brand new. I mean, every single thing I did, every week I was constantly trying to keep up, and it was so difficult. And I thought, well, year two is going to be a little bit easier. Year three is going to be even better. By year four, I've got it. And what I didn't realize is that every year is so different. So even as a fourth year librarian, I feel like this is my first year in the library because I have never experienced COVID before as a librarian. And so things kind of get thrown at you that you don't think are coming sometimes. And it's not bad, it's just different. And so just to kind of realize that every year is a little bit different. Some years are more difficult than others, but all of that builds and gives you experience. And when you, at the end of it, it really helps. Like what I learned my first year or two of third grade is helping me now. I mean, just all that experience will kind of build and it'll help you. But I did not know that every year was going to be this different.
I would definitely have to agree with Brian. Like I definitely every year is different because you have a new set of students coming in. And so one advice I'd say is just being patient too, because they're not all in the same level. So you have to be very flexible with students who may not be in the appropriate level as the other 4 or 5 kids, and so you will need to be flexible. And so one of the things I wish that they could have told me is that everything is not picture perfect. It's not just going in and teaching, because not only that, we also have additional documents that we also need to complete, right? And so, like I was just mentioning right now, we have meetings after school, and those meetings, we have to either complete some sort of form that is mandated by the state. And so so just being flexible and understanding that you will have different levels.
I would say, I guess the level of adaptability you need and kind of on the spot thinking. I would say, like, as great as those case studies are on like a scenario, they're so far from, I think, the real thing, to be honest. The real thing is just far more complex. There's way more factors that go in when you're having a conversation with a student or a situation. I think a lot of times when you do those case studies, it's like an ideal situation. Like if you take these steps, it's going to work out how you think it's going to work out. And it usually doesn't in real life. I feel like sometimes you do those steps, you do it exactly how you imagine you're going to do it, like ideally, and it sometimes just doesn't work. Even in things like intervention, right? And you're going through what you're kind of trained to do, it doesn't always work. So for example, if you're talking to a student about resources or like seeking counseling, the assumption usually in most of the studies is like they're going to utilize those resources or they're going to take steps towards some progress, right? But if that doesn't happen, what do you do then, right? Or if they're not making a certain kind of progress, what do you do at that point? So there are, I think, case studies, I think, but it's not, I think the real thing is so much more complex, and it requires so much more on the spot thinking and adaptability to even communicate with students. So like, for example, sometimes you may ask a student how they're doing, and doesn't maybe quite get to it. So you might use a different system. So I know when I talk to some of my students, I use a 1 to 10 system. So like, how are you feeling today? Like between 1 to 10. And let's say, so I can tell numerically like how they're kind of doing, because they're not always the best at describing like how they feel at the moment. But usually they can quantify it a little bit in terms of like, oh, today I'm like a 7. And I'm like, why are you a 7? Like, what's going on? So I can use that to like further the conversation. So I think it just teaches you a type of adaptability in practice that you don't always learn in the classroom. or in theory, so to speak, but on the fly, you have to try new techniques out to communicate with students or to get that or to get across an idea. And I think that's difficult to replicate when you don't have practical experience. And in a classroom, when you're practicing with your buddy or with a classmate, you don't do that as often. But yeah, that's for me was I kind of wish they would somehow. I wish there was a better way to replicate that complexity in when you're learning it. I know in practicum you do get some observation and you get it that way, but I do wish there was a way you could learn that complexity very early on, because it is not as simple as running through like a case study.
Forgive my ignorance, but I have like sort of a follow-up question to something that you had said, Rohit, and hopefully this won't take up too much time, but did they not include any sort of like communication or counseling, even basic counseling skills in education degrees?
So it depends on the program, but it may be considered an elective depending on the program.
Gotcha.
So it is not necessarily mandatory, and it would vary depending on the program. So counseling wouldn't necessarily be part of what you learn through an MED. It really depends on what's your specialization and if you choose to have it as part of your coursework. And even if it is part of your coursework may be filled, because many master programs, there's not a lot of flexibility for electives either. So it kind of depends on the program you choose and the classes that you have.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I am, to clarify why I had that question, is I am a counseling psych student at TWU. So that was something I was particularly keyed into while you were talking about it and totally agree with as well. But I also just wanted to summarize some of the skills that were important that you all mentioned, just kind of a brief list of some of the things that our students might want to pay attention to while they are in school, since they don't have to go back in time in order to benefit from you all's experiences. So I wrote down, just to summarize, a few of the ones that sounded important to you all. It sounds like adaptability is very important, patience, skills with communication, being comfortable with change, being resourceful, and especially resilience as well. So it just sounds like, based on all of your experiences, those were some of the ones that really stood out to me. And so hopefully that list will be helpful for our students to work on while they're still in school. Let's move on to question 5. What were some of the biggest challenges when you first started teaching?
I would say as a first year, third grade teacher, I was very overwhelmed, and I kind of knew that was going to happen. So I knew it was going to be a tough year my first year, but it was also a good year. I had to learn the curriculum. I had to learn the students. I had to learn classroom management, and I even had to learn the town that I was teaching in, because I am from Plano, but I was teaching in Princeton ISD, which is about 30 minutes from me. But at the time, Princeton was a very small community, and so I didn't know that community. So I was having to learn pretty much my whole environment. But one thing I would say that would help, and just my advice, is as you get into a team or you go into a school, you're going to find those people that you're super comfortable with. And I remember one teammate that just really took me under her wing, and she worked so hard with me. And so every Friday I would go into her room and I'd say, Amy, what are we doing next week? Because I didn't know. And so she would stay with me till sometimes 5:30, 6 o'clock on a Friday, and she would help me through it. And it was so helpful. So in turn, I always also look for opportunities to help other people. And you're going to find people like that in your school that will be able to help you and just really make that transition to your first year much smoother.
The question was about challenges in teaching. Okay, so similar to what Brandy mentioned, I teach 4th grade. In our campus, we have 2 4th grade teachers, and so we switch. So we switch classes, and the teacher switches, not the students. And so we're having to in the first year when I was teaching fourth grade, it was difficult because, you want to keep these kids forever. You want to keep them for the entire time on campus. But I had to switch off. And so it kind of, the rotation um, kind of may be inconsistent at times. And so right now, like I said, I'm Golden Rule. So that's an hour away, about 45 minutes away. I live actually here in Denton. And so it's 45 minutes away from where I go. And so, but I love finding and helping the students who are, again, mostly are bilingual and ESL students. And so knowing that they can have a support system like me, a person that looks just like them, um, helps them. And so, yeah, that was one of the challenges that, you have to be very, very flexible. Like I said, today we had a Fit 6 weeks test for writing, and tomorrow I have to go over the entire writing test with them, the practice writing test. And then in 2 more weeks, we have the actual stars writing test. And so you just have to be very flexible. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that you have this nice, wonderful lesson plan that you are having um, to have. And then all of a sudden the next day, it's something different. And so you just have to be very flexible and have a really good communication with your partner. Meaning, like for me, my fourth grade co-worker, she has helped me tremendously a lot. If I don't know the answer, she may know it. Don't be afraid to ask. And then just putting two heads together, and we can make it work.
Well, I would say some of the biggest challenges when I first started was really getting a grasp on your lesson plans. I think that first year when you're first kind of creating for a good chunk out of scratch, and you're really kind of getting the feel for how you want to do the lesson itself and how you want to kind of execute the lesson itself, and how it may even go over with your students, because it doesn't always. So you may need to adapt for another time, or it may work better with another period of students. And so you may just need to do a lot more adjustment. So I would say that first year, at least for myself, it felt very like choppy in terms of like trying to get my flow in teaching. It's just not as, I guess you envision like a smooth, like you want it to go very smoothly, but in reality, it's like a choppy ocean. Like you're just trying to get from point A to point B as best you can. But you also see people who are, experienced educators, and it's like they're sailing on the wind, basically. Like it just looks so smooth, like the way they teach. And so that first year, it is just choppy, and I think that's just part of it. Like, it's just how you learn. It's not going to go perfect. There's a lot of times where you're just like, that did not go how I wanted it to go, or I wish I would have said this differently, or I forgot to do this. There's just a lot that first year that just does not go exactly how you want. So it is very, I would say, this kind of choppy flow. And I would say the other piece is that they hit you with a lot of questions, students do, and you don't know, I would say, like half of them. Like for me, there was just so many times where I did not know the answer. And you don't always expect that as an instructor or a teacher. Not as much. Like I think I was just caught aback by how difficult some of the questions were, how much I really didn't know. Because it's a new institution, it's a new school, it's a new class, it's new students. Things are always changing with institutions in particular. And so that lack of information is, I think you just learn as you go. So usually by the time you finish your first year, you have a pretty good grasp of most questions that can come up. So yeah, that choppiness and that saying, I don't know, that's part of it. You just have to be comfortable with that, and finding that information out. So if you don't know, let me get back to you on that. I'm going to figure out what that is. So yeah, you use those research skills a lot. But yeah.
Great answers, everyone. Thank you all for those. Some of the things that I heard were find your people. And that really made me think of mentorship. So I definitely want to encourage everyone to look for mentors in their first year when they're out. I think Brandy was absolutely right that you're going to need those people and that support for sure. Teamwork sounded very important to Angelica, as well as like skills and resilience. So just being able to sort of handle new situations and challenging situations. And then I really liked, I feel like what Rahit brought up was in general, giving yourself some compassion to not be perfect, to be okay saying, I don't know, or I'll get back to you on that. As from a counseling perspective, I think having self-compassion could be really important, especially in your first year of literally any job, because you're probably going to feel a little bit overwhelmed anyway, as Brandy had mentioned as well. So yeah, those were some of the things I thought you all said that were really well highlighted. So our next question, number 6, is how did you handle a tough situation that was occurring in a student's life outside the classroom?
When I was in special education, I was in a resource classroom, and so that meant that I taught kids who were in the classroom, and I pulled them out for support, and sometimes they were with me for long periods of time or short periods of time, but they spent a good deal of their time in general education, and then they came to me for special education support. And I got to know those kids really, really well because I worked with those kids and parents for years. And so I may have started with them in kindergarten or first grade, and I was still their special education teacher when they were in 3rd or 4th grade. So I had strong connections with those parents. And so when something did come up that was a difficult situation from home, that parent was comfortable enough to call me and say, hey, this is what's going on. And just to have that open communication with the parent made all the difference in the world. So sometimes if you could just get that relationship with a parent, you could really help what's going on at home.
In my situation, I have to be observant. I have to monitor students. So if I see that the student is either his grades are low, they actually are, they all of a sudden they decrease, and I look at that. And so one situation that actually happened, and I had to ask the student myself, took him to the side and actually outside because my class is in the portable. So I took him outside and I spoke to him, is there something wrong? Because this is not the student that I know you are. And he opened up to me, and it turned out, he had some family passed away, and then his parents were going through a divorce. And so there's a lot of things that are behind at home that we don't know as teachers. And so sometimes it takes us to be observant and to just monitor the way their behavior is. And so what I did is that after the student expressed that to me, I talked to my principal and expressed all the information that was given to me. Of course, it's very important that as teachers, you also document all this information. And so my principal went ahead and took over, meaning they brought in a specialist to help the student. And then I communicated with the parent of his grades, and but mostly the principal did more of that communication piece, because since it's more of a death in the family and also a divorce issue, they had to seek in a counseling for that student. And so I think it's very important that you keep yourself open and observant to them, their behavior when you're teaching, because you never know what is going on at home. um, and they're not going to open up to you. They're just, you will see it. I know for like right now we're dealing with another situation where another student at this time, is falling asleep in class, and this student is usually like awesome, always giving 100%, participating. And now it's just like we're teaching and he's falling asleep. So we're dealing with another situation that we may not know. Maybe a family member has passed away in COVID, because there's a lot of that happening at this time. Um, and so those are some things that you can look forward and also um, look to see. And again, as a teacher, you have that option of interfering, meaning of going the next step. And I did that, and there's a lot of teachers that do it. They go the extra mile to help a student. Finding those resources. If your school doesn't have it, especially if it's a low income school, like if they don't have it, go seek for them. Go seek it. And then we use Class Dojo. And so, like, if I see something in social media that may benefit the student or their parents, I post it there, which is another. Class Dojo is another communication um, outlet that we can communicate with parents. And so we send it out to them. I send it out as a resources, because you just never know. You never know what's happening at home.
You're on mute, Rahit.
Sorry, I'm like playing one of those things y'all see in every Zoom call. You never think it's going to be you. But one of the tough situations that happened in one of my students' life was his father had passed away. And so just for some context about this particular class, it's a seminar class. Attendance is not mandatory in the sense like it is from K through 12. Students simply have more freedom in that sense. And so one of the ways that we keep, so usually a lot of things you do as an educator also include some administrative things, which for the most part, I'll be honest, I find extremely boring. But in some cases are very helpful. So in this particular case, tracking attendance, and I use a color-coded system. So it was easier to find a pattern of non-attendance in this particular system I used. And so I reached out to that student, asked him like, hey, yeah, I noticed you weren't showing up for a couple of our seminars and you're usually there. Like I noticed he was present for like the first couple of weeks and then he just kind of dropped off the map, which it can be hard to always keep track, particularly in a class where you've just started to get to know them. Because I think one thing to also remember with seminar, you only see them an hour a week. So you're not in front of them all the time. You're not seeing them daily. So you're still trying to get the hang of their names and everyone who is present. And so, kind of like Angelica mentioned, like a lot of educators take an intervention-based approach where we will intervene. And so I reached out to the student, scheduled a meeting. I was like, hey, I need you to schedule a meeting to talk to me directly. And so he came in, we spoke, realized what he was going through and why he had just kind of dropped off the map with his classes. And honestly, it makes sense because if you have full-time class load, you're trying to cope with the passing of a parent, seminar is not going to be high on that priority list. And I understand that. So we got him connected to some counseling. We also just talked through it a little bit more, changed some deadlines for him with some flexibility. So again, that flexibility is very important when you're working with students. But I think in this particular case, there's this realization that there's only so much you can do. So even with counseling and flexibility of deadlines, students still, in this case, went back home, understood the decision, wasn't mad at him, like there's nothing to be mad about. There's just a level of understanding you have to have that, because there's a part of you who also works for the university or the system, and part of it is retaining your students. And sometimes that is not the best thing for the student. It is, I know it sounds a little bit contrary, but sometimes it is best that they just do what's best for them. And in this case, it meant leaving the institution and dropping out of college. But in this particular case, we were able to work with that student and work on finding a community college option where they could attend part-time so they wouldn't fall as far behind on their progress if they ever wanted to come back. And so in some situations, there is no ideal solution. It is not resolved, I guess, the way you might learn it to be resolved. So yeah, in this case, we weren't able to retain the student, and it's, but it isn't really about that. It's, what is going to work best for this student. so that they can kind of get through it. Because I think education is just a piece. It's important, don't get me wrong, education is an important piece, but it's not the only one. And so dealing with that, and that was the first time I'd handled a situation that tough, like in a real life scenario outside of the classroom and like those things. And so it's, again, was choppy, not ideal, but you use what you're trained in a little bit, and you combine that with, I guess, your ability to communicate with people more naturally, and that works fairly well. But just, I think one thing to keep in mind with those situations is that it is not always ideal, and it isn't going to be. So you just kind of do the best you can, however you can.
Thank you all for those answers. To summarize, I heard both Brandy and Angelica speak about how important it is to keep connected with parents. Angelica, I thought the technology program, I don't know what you called it, I forget what it was, but the program that you use to connect with parents through like a social media type platform, I think that's really nifty. So definitely be utilizing the technology that's available to you if it's there, and the parents use it, then that's just another way to connect. Dojo, that's it. Thank you, Rahit. And then also, being okay or knowing when is a good time to ask for assistance with a situation that is, a more challenging situation. If you don't feel you can handle it yourself, there are other people there within the education system that can help support you. And so it's important to know when you need to ask for help as well. And then just overall observing your students, like being aware of who they are and what their normal behaviors are, and if those normal behaviors change. And give grace, like Rahit was talking about with his student that had been through, a tragedy in their family. These students, these are humans just as much as we are. And while education is very important, as Rahit said, they have lives to live and mental health to be aware of. And so they're all going to need some grace at some time as well. So I thought those were all really great messages that you had shared with us. We're going to go ahead and move on to one more panel question, and then we've got some time saved for audience questions. I know that some of you have been adding your questions to the chat, and thank you for that. If you have any additional questions, feel free to add those to the chat right now or anytime. And after this last panel question, we'll switch over to that and have you all give you all the opportunity to ask the questions that you have. But for our last panel question, what motivates you to continue teaching or working with students?
Like I said, I think being in the library is one of the best jobs of the whole school. It's super fun, and you just get feedback from kids in different ways than you would in the classroom. And sometimes, like when you least expect it, you'll have a kid just say something to you, and you're like, wow, I'm making such an impact. My favorite is kindergarten. They will come up to me and they will say, oh, I love reading. And so I was like, wow, I'm making an impact. Or I'll just walk into a classroom and they're like, yes, Mrs. Carline's here. It's time to get books. Like the whole room just gets so excited. And so I think just the little feedback that you'll get, you just won't even know when it's going to happen. Sometimes when it's really difficult, you'll have a kid just like say, hey, I made this picture for you. And it's just so neat to get all that feedback. By the time you had a year or two under your belt, you'll have all these little papers, and you're going to save everything, because all that stuff is just so memorable, and it just shows you the impact that you can have. So I would say just little moments keep me excited about teaching.
I'm gonna piggyback also with inspiration, being a role model to them. That's what keeps me going. There's again a majority of my students are bilingual in ESL, or in some newcomers, meaning like they have no English at all. And so knowing that I impacted them, helped them learn English, that helps me continue along. I know I did it. I'll give you an example. I teach bilingual. I had a newcomer, meaning a student that came from El Salvador, and that student came with minimal English, and in 5th grade, the teacher told me, I don't know what you did, but thank you because this student is having these conversations in English and reading English more fluently. And so that makes me continue on, and knowing that I made an impact to the student and also helping out the, the other teacher too, because it, that's a highly need. And so I'll piggyback again, inspiration, and just keep going.
So I would say for myself, I'm fortunate enough to work with students who are usually in transitional moments. So when I worked in the nonprofit, students who are going into college, or same thing with AVID, students who are about to enter college. When I taught seminar, it's their first year there. And now as a career consultant, I often work with folks who are transitioning into a career or trying to. And so I've been very fortunate to work in those particular realms. And so because of that, I get to witness students transition into their next kind of phase of life. So let me give you like an example here. So when I was an undergrad, I was working as an AVID tutor, and I worked within this freshman classroom at the local high school. There was a student there, her name is Ashley. And so she was one of my students back then, and she was within one of the AVID groups I worked with. I remember they brought me down into that particular classroom because they're having a little bit of trouble. I typically worked with seniors, and so I usually didn't have to dabble in the freshman classes because they were harder to work with. And so I really liked working with the seniors. But this particular week or two, they needed a little bit more help with the freshman classes. So I went down there, and she was one of my students there, Ashley. And so fast forward a couple years, now I am here in this position a year ago, and I was teaching the UNIV class here, 1231, which is the freshman seminar class. And there was a student in the first row, and it was Ashley. And the part that really boggled me, I did not know for maybe 4 weeks, because for 4 weeks I was like, she looks so familiar. But I didn't want to just call her. I'd be like, hey, do I know you? Just on the first day to a student who's new to university. I didn't want to pull that. So I just let it alone. I'm like, I'm sure she just has a familiar face. And then maybe four or 5 weeks down the road, when we were all getting more familiar and we knew each other a little bit better, I was like, hey, did you go to this high school? And she's like, how'd you know that? And I was like, you were a freshman when I was a tutor there. And I remember at the time, she was so worried about college and all these concerns, and just to see her in the classroom in university was just amazing, because it's like, you made it. That was something that you were really struggling with and really was on your mind at the time. And now you're here doing amazing things. And she got to go to this, what's called a plan conference. And so she got to go to DC, and we worked together on that, on her cover letter and resume. And so she got to be part of another amazing opportunity. And so it's just those little moments that you think probably won't matter, because honestly, when you're going through your day-to-day, you just get caught up. You're just like, oh, I'm just trying to finish my day, I'm just trying to make it through the week. But all those little moments do make a difference, and you don't always know it. But at least in my particular case, I'm fortunate enough to be in those transition moments to where my students are also transitioning as I'm transitioning into different positions. And so I've gotten to witness them make it into their next part. And that for me really solidifies this work matters.
Awesome answers yet again. To summarize, I heard just mostly paying close attention to the feedback that you get from your students, and overall just seeing the evidence of your impact seems like it's really important to keep you motivated in the job. And if I may just insert a tiny bit of psychology, I swear I won't bore you for too long, but all of your answers made so much sense to me, because if you think about it, knowing that you've achieved something successfully releases dopamine in your brain. So it makes you happy. And so it makes you feel good, and it helps you feel fulfilled in your job, which is also a really great way to prevent burnout too in your job. So just to insert that tiny piece of psychology, keeping track of the feedback that you get, making those memories with your students, being an inspiring role model to them, and seeing the impact of your efforts. Those are all going to be really important things for you. To help, continue to motivate you in your career after, your first couple of years. So Fantastic answers from all of you. And thank you all so much just for answering our general panel questions. We are going to transition over to some of the student questions. So again, students, if you have a question, go ahead and put that into the chat box for me, and I will just read them in order of how they appeared. Our first question comes from Amanda, and she is asking Brandy, you mentioned that you taught in special education. What was your certification process like? Also, how was teaching special education different from teaching third grade? And what was the experience like, and did you enjoy it? And if that were too many questions, Brandy, you can also get into the chat and see where Amanda wrote all of those for you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm looking at it right now, so I may refer back to it. My degree, of course, was not in education at first. I have a business degree. When I got my master's degree, I had an old certification. I don't even think this is a certification anymore. My certification was 1st through 6th. So I didn't have kindergarten. I was just 1st through 6th general education. And when I went into 3rd grade, I was watching the special education teachers and how they were working with those kids. And I'm like, that would be so great to be able to do that. And so I decided I wanted to get my special education certification. And what I did was I just took the test. But to do that, I had to study. And it's not an easy test. It's something you just really need to know the legalities of special education, and just kind of, there's some very important things that are very unique to special education. So I actually took a class at Region 10 to prepare for that test, and it was worth every dollar of that $75 that I paid. And that whole Saturday I took, because Region 10 taught me everything I needed to know to get through that test, and just the legalities of special education. So once I passed my test, I was certified EC through 12 special education as well. But teaching special education is different. You have to, like I was saying, you have to understand the legalities of special education, like the paperwork, understanding IEPs, understanding how to meet those minutes, and you just have to make sure, you have to be extremely organized, and you just have to understand all that paperwork and all the legalities behind it. So luckily, I had a very strong team when I went in, a very experienced team, and they just like the 3rd grade teacher that helped me through on Friday afternoons, I had another person just come and help me through my 1st year of special education. So that's different, but also in the general education classroom, there's a lot going on. You've got, 20 kids maybe, but in special education, I was able to pull out groups of like 4 and 5 and work with them on what they specifically needed. And sometimes that was the content they were learning in the classroom. Sometimes I was modifying the curriculum to what they needed. And so you kind of have to be a jack of all trades when you teach special education, because it's very much specially designed instructions for the student and what they need. But I really enjoyed that part of special education, being able to cater to what those kids needed. And I definitely enjoyed special education. And even in the library, you would think the library and special education would be two very different areas, but not really. I could take very much what I learned in special education and put that right into the library.
Thank you so much, Brandy. We appreciate your answers there. The next question that we have.
Can I say thank you as well?
Oh, sure. Of course.
Yeah, sorry. So are we allowed to talk?
Absolutely, you can. I think for me,
Okay.
For me as a facilitator, it's just easier to read questions through the chat, but you are absolutely allowed to talk. I'm sorry if I did not say that before.
No, I was just, yeah, anyway, I was wondering. I just wanted to say thank you personally, because that was very much what I wanted to hear. So thank you, Brandy.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Amanda. I'll go ahead and read another question from Amanda, and it did not specify to whom this question goes to, so I'm open to every panelist. She asks, since teaching requires such adaptability and flexibility, how do you keep any sort of structure in your life? In other words, how do you keep yourself from feeling crazy or overwhelmed?
I'll go first if you want to stay in order. That's probably my structure. I like structure. So basically, I don't know why I've always been this way, but I run on a to-do list. I feel like if I have a to-do list, it's not in my head, I won't forget it if it's on my to-do list. And that's kind of how I operate. Even when I am in a classroom, I'm always writing to-do lists for the kids. And so I would say to keep myself from going crazy or feeling overwhelmed, I have that to-do list. But also I have to prioritize that to-do list. So sometimes I look at my to-do list and it will make me feel better because I'm like, oh, I thought I had all this stuff to do and it's really not that bad. I only have 5 things that are driving me crazy. I can totally do that. And sometimes my to-do list is so long, I have to prioritize. And sometimes I'll prioritize and say, okay, what do I need to do? Or sometimes I'll say, what is really bothering me? What is driving me crazy? And maybe it's not the most important thing for me to do, but it's what is really bothering me. And so once I get that out of the way, then I'm able to kind of refocus. And so I'd say in order to keep myself from going crazy and to keep myself structured, to my to-do list, but also, as you know, like Amanda mentioned in her question, being flexible. Sometimes they'll call you to do something completely different. It's not on your to-do list. And so I would say too, having that list helps me, but also realizing my day may not be going through that list. I may only get one thing done or two. I may get through my whole list, but it just kind of helps me stay on track.
So my daily life, and without me being getting overwhelmed or on things, I have a 4-year-old child, like I mentioned, and then I also travel an hour away for work. I have a to-do list as well. Typically, like 8 to 4 o'clock is there. I'm always writing. I have to have it in writing, otherwise it's just gonna go by. So using a planner, if I started my first year using a planner, because they unexpected meetings would come in, and so it would be quick for me to just write them down. But then we started using Google Calendar, so you can use those as well. That keeps me, it syncs to your phone, so you get a notification. So that helps me. I always say this, and I say it because a mentor of mine told me when it's 4 o'clock, it's time for you to let go and then focus on your family. So once 4 o'clock hits, I'm like, I'm going home and I'm going to spend time with my family. Then when my son goes to sleep, 8 o'clock, 8:30, then I'll jump in and maybe modify my lessons of what I'm going to be teaching tomorrow. Um, my lesson plans are my principal. Every principal is different, or every school is different. But my principal is he's a family oriented person, so he understands. So by Thursday 4 p.m. your lesson plans should be completed. If you don't complete them by 4 p.m., just let him know, and he'll give you flexibility to maybe Friday at night to be done. And they do that because they want us to, um, for being flexible, because they understand that we have a family, and also for our mental health. you know we need to look at those pieces too. We also have, Mondays and Wednesdays are tutoring at my school. So that ends at 4:45. So I stay till 4:45 sometimes, um, to go and tutor these students. And then we also have Saturday school, for those that are in third and fourth and fifth, meaning the kids that are going to take the STAR test. So we have Saturday school as well. Um, if you're not able to attend, my principal is also flexible. He would have another person go ahead and teach my my piece. And so I say, using your mentors, you speaking to your principal, speaking to your spouse, speaking to other people to help you as a person not be so overwhelmed and not being, because mental health is very important. Having a to-do list, having either a planner or having your Google. I wouldn't suggest your phone. I say yes, but then I don't, because the notifications, and for some people it may be overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, I have to do this now, so I would go with the to-do list and the planner. That's mainly what I use.
So also just immediately after this question, I was sent an anonymous question, so I will mention that. So just so you know, I will mention that afterwards. But I think one thing to keep in mind with this particular question, adaptability, is I think it's different for different positions, because education is a very broad field and industry. It is so it's different for different positions, I think, and to the level at which you might use different techniques and tools to kind of adapt and organize yourself. But one thing I do use myself is a master calendar. Outlook is probably my best friend at work. I live by it, and my calendar really helps keep me mentally straight in terms of what I need to be doing that day or what I have coming up that week. I also am using my personal calendar a lot as well. I think after I started working in education, I realized how important it was to also keep my personal calendar up to date. I couldn't just do things on the fly as much as I could before. I think with a full-time job, that really changes things in terms of structure of activities, even in your personal life. At least for myself, it did. So for me, a calendar on both work and personal life was very helpful. I do use my phone for both of mine. I'm kind of hooked to it in a way. But I think knowing when to keep that phone off, or knowing when to not ignore your notifications or ignore emails, is important. So I think that's also leads me to my next point, is that not everything is a priority. And sometimes you have to articulate that to whoever's sending you that message. I'll be honest, I sometimes do it with students, where a student will email me on a weekend or very late on a Friday, for example, and be like, hey, I need help with this as soon as possible. And I'll just let them know very quickly that, you know what, I'm actually pretty swamped this week. I won't be able to get back to you by this date. So that might be 3-4 days out. Because there are times where we're just swamped and I can't get back to you within that normal range, right, that we usually have. And so it's just important to articulate both to your students and to coworkers or whoever is asking. If it's not mandatory, if it's not regulation or something dictated by the state, not everything is necessarily a priority you have to get to that moment. And articulating that can be kind of hard, because it kind of feels like you're challenging them in some ways. But once you get used to that, they're usually fine with it. They understand for the most part. I've rarely been gotten bad feedback on that. And the last I would say is having structured activities has been a huge help. Once a week, I always go biking with my friends, and we set that up where we all have different schedules, but that's something I know for myself helps keep me just a little bit more sane every week, that I have this activity that I'm going to do no matter what. Unless one of us is sick, and even then the other two will go, or if something just it takes a lot for us not to meet up and do that. So I think those structured activities with your friends or with your family are very important. It's not ideally how I'd like to do activities, to structure a social thing, but I think that's kind of what you have to do when you have that many priorities, right, and responsibilities, is that structure really helps.
Thank you. That was really, really helpful. Thank you so much, guys.
And then let me ask the question that was sent in. Was there any fear you had when teaching in the classroom? How did you get over it? What is your motivation to keep going? That person, were you, I'm not sure, did you want me to ask that to everyone or just myself? You can just PM me if that works better.
Yeah, I meant to send it to everybody, but I actually sent it directly only, so.
Okay, but yeah, do you want to start, Brandy?
Sure. So my fear when I started in education was just, and I knew I was going to be overwhelmed, I just didn't want any of the parents to know I didn't know what I was doing. I was afraid, like, I mean, I knew that the teachers would kind of know that I was a first year teacher, but I kind of had a fear of the parents knowing, you know, that I thought, well, they're not going to be happy that I'm a first year teacher. And I guess that was my fear. But when I went in, I worked really hard to have those relationships with those parents. And I remember someone telling me, I think it was in graduate school, to call those parents and just like just one by one, just give them a call and say, hey, you know, I'm your child's teacher, and maybe just kind of start to build those relationships in a positive way. So if I needed to call them again, they've already heard from me once. And I remember calling those parents one by one, and I was terrified. They were like, why are you calling me? And what did my child do wrong? They were so surprised I was calling them just to say, hey, you know, you've got such a cool kid, and you know, I'm just so happy they're in my class. And so I think just reaching out to those parents, I kind of overcame my fear really quick because they were so accepting of me, and my fear of becoming being a first year teacher, and it wasn't really even there. Like, those parents weren't thinking about that. They were totally fine, and they were so happy that I was just reaching out to them.
So my fear is teaching social studies. I don't know why, but I just felt like, oh my goodness, I'm not gonna be able, you know, to teach history, because I mean, as you know, maybe, and Rahit may know this, I start in one conversation and I can go in a different conversation, and so that was my fear. But once you're there in front and teaching them the material, and you actually will, you know, it'll tell you, like, this is the topic that you have to teach, the Constitution, and then these are the key points that you need to highlight. So you need to be specific and teach them those contexts. But when you're in front and you're telling them, their eyes are just open and they're wanting to learn. It's like they don't know what you're gonna tell them. And so they don't know, so don't have that fear. And so that's how I overcame it. And I told myself, you know what? They don't know what you know. They don't know what you're gonna teach them, or what's the next thing that's gonna come from you. And so go ahead and just do it. And so that was my fear. That's how I overcame it. I'm very a visual learner, and so that helps a lot of the students too. And they're like, oh yeah, that. Or in social studies, what I do is that I kind of acted out, like reader's theater. Like, I act out, like the other day we were talking about the Alamo, the many battles that were in Texas. And so one of it was the Battle of Alamo, and I had the students reenact it. You know, those are things that they don't know, but just knowing that, hey, I taught the subject very well, they understood, that's good.
I would say for myself, one of my fears was if I could keep that same energy that I had like that first month or so through the year. Because when you're there for that amount of time, particularly when I was doing the nonprofit teaching, that was much longer than seminar. Seminar was just an hour a week, very doable. But in nonprofit teaching, that was about 7 to 8 nonstop, basically, except for lunch. And even then, you had students who would sit and eat lunch with you, so you're still kind of on in many ways, right? You're just on for the whole day, and that's very tiring and very draining. And so one of my fears was if I could still kind of maintain that kind of person I was in the beginning throughout the whole year, because I did not want to turn into someone who was like disgruntled and not happy to come into work, or, you know, the teacher that had just kind of like was too tired to really be them, I guess. Because you do see that sometimes. I do remember that going to school sometimes, and, you know, we're human too. And so there was that real fear of, you know, can I still be me in the classroom, even when I get tired and it's more than a month, right? I guess how I got over it is that I don't know if you really do. I guess part of it is in a sense like you find little ways to kind of get remotivated. You find little ways to get re-energized, and I think part of it is even though you are kind of on your feet all day, that's also kind of what makes the job pretty exciting. Is that you're just adapting and thinking constantly, trying to find ways to engage people, and in that own way, it's very fun. Like hands down, one of the most engaging things you're going to do when teaching is that spontaneous stuff where you're trying to figure out a way to make a concept click. And when it clicks, it's just so fantastic because you can see it, like you can tell it clicks with them. And I think those little things, like I think they just kind of add back to you, and the energy that you can give back to your classroom. And to be honest, some days you just don't have it. Like, at least for myself, there were some days when I did seminar and teaching where it just reflects and they can tell. Like they can tell you're not having like the best day, or there's something else going on. You do your best not to show it, but kids are very in tune with people. Like they're social, they're probably the most social beings you're going to come across. And so they pick up on stuff very well. But I think that's also, I think adds energy back. The fact they can pick up on it, and the fact they know you so well like that, I think also just gets you more motivated to be like, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to come in and do better. So it's just like one of those weird things where the problem is also in a way a solution. I don't know if that's making sense, but that fear, I think, goes away with, I think, just time and practice, but then also the energy that you get back, whether it's, through self-care on the weekends or what you're doing after work, or, I think colleagues also make up a big part of your workplace. Like, I think colleagues, the people you work with, I think can really make or break your experience. For me, my colleagues really help re-motivate me into doing what I do. But yeah.
Thank you guys. That really helped me out.
Great questions and definitely great answers from our panelists. Thank you all so much. I did not see any additional questions come up in the chat, so I'll just offer one more moment for anyone who might want to speak up with a question before we wrap up for the evening. So I'll just give everyone some time to speak up if they'd like to ask one more question. Okay, it doesn't sound like we have any more, so I'll go ahead and just wrap us up here. So as we wrap up, I just want to give our panelists the opportunity to share, any of their final thoughts or overall advice that they might want to share or leave you with. So I'll just give everyone, a few moments to do that.
I'll start. I would say just to enjoy this time when you're in school. It's a great time. So you will find things that you learned in school that are really going to help you. And you'll be able to go, even some of the things that will happen your first year or two, you'll go, oh, I learned that in school. I know how to do that. And so just enjoy this time. And also when you do get into the classroom, just give yourself grace. Like we were saying, it's not going to go perfect, but you're going to be able to look back on that and say, wow, even though it was my first year, I really did have a great impact on the students.
So one word of advice from me to you all is, if you're currently at TWU, seek for many opportunities, volunteer opportunities, community service, and attend these presentations or seminars, just like you're doing here right now at Career Connections. Also, take some time to explore, meaning like not just be here at TWU, but also take some time for yourself, and look at other options. Either you can start volunteering at either at an elementary school that you want to be at, or having those connections already, doing those things, have a mentor either at college or having a mentor at your job. Um, that will benefit you in the long run. As you can see, all of us have a mentor. Either we spoke either to where our co-teacher or co-worker or our principal, having just having a mentor to help you. Don't ever give up. I know we all started in one path and we went different directions, and then we ended up coming back to educations. And so don't give up on any of those of your goals on your journey. Either, again, you may think right now that education is it, but maybe 5, 10 years from now you may say, maybe I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and go on to being a psychologist. And that is perfectly fine, because at the end you already have the experience in working with students and knowing, again, like I think someone in the career connections, right? You're a psychologist. And yes, and so like having those, like you mentioned, we as teachers need to look at those behaviors, look at those, how they act and how they speak, and that helps us in our next journey. And so don't give up and continue being very successful and telling yourself, I can do this, having positive notes in your Google Chromebook or your laptop or in your phone. Having those positive vibes will keep you going. And thank you guys, thank you so much for listening to us.
I would say that it's important to keep in mind that education is broad. Like I mentioned earlier, you may end up doing, so just to echo what Angelica said, you may end up doing different things. You may start in education and go do something else. You may go do something else and end up in education, or any number of things. I think what's important to remember is that, keep in mind, how are you making an impact? Is what I'm doing impactful in some way? And if it is, then that's good. Like that's part of it. Because there may come a time when when you decide that, what, I've done enough, or maybe I want to go back, or whatever it may be. There's these transition moments in your life, right? And that's fine. I think sometimes we feel guilty. Like I know I did when I left AmeriCorps and just kind of stepped away from teaching formally in that way. There's a certain sense of guilt, like you feel like you're abandoning your students. That's a very real feeling. But you have to remember that you're doing impact in another way, because a lot of educators end up working in education maybe in another way. But I think it's important to realize that we all impact students just in our own way, that we are comfortable. We still have our own goals, our own ambitions, our own well-being to think about. And so that changes over time. Your priorities change over time. But I think as long as you're thinking about, do I still enjoy doing this? Am I motivated to do this? And does it have an impact on people? And if that's a yes, then I stick with it. If it doesn't, find something else. And that's perfectly okay.
Thank you all so much. And thank you so much for joining us and for asking fantastic questions. And thank you to our panelists, for sharing their time and experience and knowledge and advice with you all, and with our students today. With that, we're pretty much wrapped up. So I will just say a final thank you and goodbye. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.
So do we need to formally close the recording in some way, or?
I was going to, but I just thought you might want to check in after we finished. So
Yeah, I thought it went really well.
yeah. One moment real quick.
I know I saw Trevor join in, I think, a
Mhm.
little bit later.
Yeah, I did too. I thought that was cool. I didn't know he was going to join us.
Yeah, I'll ask him what he thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Justine couldn't join.
I
Because
know.
I was just like,
You did a really great job as a panelist, though. You had some awesome answers, and great advice for everybody. You did really good.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And you did a fantastic job facilitating.
thank you.
I think it all went very well.
Me too. I'm happy with it.
All right. Well, that's 7 o'clock. Why don't we go ahead and get on home?
That sounds like a plan.
All right.
All right.
Take care.